It's time once again, guys, as we have the next engine access, focusing on the decks coming out in Justice Hunters, as time to go over Dragontail. Now we will be jumping into it, so if you have never watched an episode of Engine Access, go check it out before. They have been on the Rumble channel as well as here on YouTube, so go check it out. This one will obviously be in the style of the last one we had on K9, so do enjoy it as I'll be jumping into it right now. So let's go over the criteria of what we need when we're going over an Engine Access like this, as we focus on what you can splash with Dragontail. So starting off, the first thing we want to talk about is the synergistic and multi-beneficial aspect of these certain strategies. Now, the reason this is important is obvious. When you're trying to figure out what you want to play with any type of deck in any type of card game, if you want to put two things together that aren't necessarily a part of the same archetype, it is clear that they have to either benefit each other or add something that works together, or more importantly, they actually work together really well, even though they don't have the names. There are many archetypes like that, so it is very important, and that's what we aim for on the first criteria. Second, we also weigh the pros and the cons. Now, this is something that you could argue doesn't really need to be a criteria, but it is very important. A lot of times when you're splashing engines with certain strategies, the biggest problem you're going to have is that one strategy may provide something the others can't. And additionally, some of them offer different types of restrictions or cons here where they don't actually help your deck, but they may hinder it, or sometimes those negatives actually benefit your deck. So there's a lot of different things you can view here. Finally, we look at the likelihood of bans and or restrictions to any of the archetypes that you splash or the weaknesses of it. This is mostly here because a lot of times when you have strategies that already exist that are really good, when a new product comes out, there's a good chance that the engines that already exist and the decks that are already powerful, there's a likelihood that these strategies may not actually be able to work with these old strategies, as a ban list could sweep them off the ground. And because of many speculated ban lists coming out very soon, this is a good chance that this might happen to some of the strategies we look at today. So let's jump into it, as we are going into the engine access and focusing on Dragontail, as I'm going to welcome you to the Dragontail archetype by looking over what cards exist currently and what will be accessible once Justice Hunters releases. Starting off with Dragontail, we look at one of their most important main deck monsters, and arguably probably the most important one for the mechanic, that being Dragontail Femina. Now, Dragontail Femina has the effect that during the main phase, as a quick effect, you can discard this card for cost. At resolution, you would fusion summon one dragon or spellcaster fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or field. If this card is sent to the graveyard as material for a fusion summon, you can set one Dragontail spell/trap from your deck. You can only use each effect of Dragontail Femina once per turn. Moving into the next main deck monster, we have their Stratos, being Dragontail Lucius. Dragontail Lucius, it has the effect that if this card is normal or special summoned, you can add one Dragontail monster from your deck to your hand, except Dragontail Lucius. Then if this card is sent to the graveyard as material for a fusion summon, you can set one Dragontail spell/trap from your deck. You can only use each effect of Dragontail Lucius once per turn. Moving into the next main deck monster, we now have Dragontail Urgula, which is one of the other high-level main deck monsters, being that if this card is sent to the graveyard as material for a fusion summon, you could set one Dragontail spell/trap from your deck. Then you can destroy one spell/trap on the field. Pretty cool. If this card is in your graveyard, you can target one spellcaster Dragontail monster in your graveyard as cost. Place this card on the bottom of the deck at resolution, and if you do, add that monster to your hand. You can only use each effect of Dragontail Urgula once per turn. Pretty neat. We have its other high-level counterpart in Dragontail Pan, being more of the, what I would say, bestial forms of the Dragontail monsters, where this card, if this card is sent to the graveyard as a material for a fusion summon, you could set one Dragontail spell/trap from your deck. Then you can destroy one monster on the field, and then if a face-up fusion monster or monsters you control is destroyed by an opponent's card effect while this card is in your graveyard, except during the damage step, you can place this card on the bottom of the deck, and if you do, special summon one non-fusion Dragontail monster from your graveyard. You can only use each effect of Dragontail Pan once per turn. Finally, we finish off with the last Dragontail monster, that being Dragontail Muller. This one is a level 3 Dark Dragon monster that has the effect that during the main phase, as a quick effect, you can fusion summon one Dragontail fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or field. Also, you cannot special summon from the extra deck for the rest of this turn, except fusion monsters, and if this card is sent to the graveyard as material for a fusion summon, you can set one Dragontail spell/trap from your deck. Then you can negate the effects of one face-up monster your opponent controls. You can only use each effect of Dragontail Muller once per turn. Moving into the spells, first we have the in-archetype fusion spell, being Rahu Dragontail. It allows you to fusion summon one Dragontail fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand, deck and or field. Also, you cannot special summon from the extra deck for the rest of this turn after this card resolves, except fusion monsters. You can only activate one Rahu Dragontail per turn. Pretty cool. Moving into the other spell, we have Ketu Dragontail. Now, Ketu Dragontail allows you to add one Dragontail monster from your deck to your hand. Then, if your opponent controls a monster, you can fusion summon one dragon or spellcaster monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or field. You can only activate one Ketu Dragontail per turn. Pretty neat. Now let's go over the spells. The traps. First, we have Dragontail Flame. This one allows you to target one face-up spell on the field as cost, and then at resolution, you negate its effects until the end of this turn. Then you can place one Dragontail card from your graveyard or banishment on the bottom of the deck, except Dragontail Flame, then draw one card. You can only activate one Dragontail Flame per turn. We then have Dragontail Horn. This one allows you to target one attack position monster on the field as cost, return it to the hand/extra deck. Then you can place one Dragontail card from your graveyard or banishment on the bottom of the deck, except Dragontail Horn, then draw one card. You can only activate one Dragontail Horn per turn. Moving into our extra deck, we have first of the two fusions. We have Dragontail Gromel. Gromel requires a Dragontail monster plus one monster in the hand, and when you activate a Dragontail card or effect, you as a quick effect can target one card your opponent controls as cost and destroy it. If two or more monsters are sent to the graveyard at the same time while this card is in your graveyard, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card but banish it when it leaves the field. You can only use each effect of Dragontail Gromel once per turn. Now we finish off with the last fusion released in Justice Hunters as we go to Dragontail Altharion. This one allows you to, for its materials, be one Dragontail monster plus one monster in the hand. Very cool. And then if this card is fusion summoned, you can target monsters on the field and or in any graveyard or graveyards up to the number of monsters uses material from the hand as cost. Then at resolution, you return them to the hand. If two or more monsters are sent to the graveyard at the same time while this card is in your graveyard, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card but banish it when it leaves the field. You can only use each effect of Dragontail Altharion once per turn. So very cool, as that's the entire archetype. We'll be going over the archetypes. You can now splash with them, so I hope you do enjoy this, as this is where the meat and potatoes begin. Starting off with archetypes, we're going into looking at, we'll go from more likely to be hit on a ban list to less likely and or ones that do need more experimentation. First, starting off, we have the most unassuming one, and it's not just a repeat from the K9 video, I promise you. We have Fiendsmith. I think I have to address this really quickly, because if a ban list comes out, whether before this video comes out or after, there's a possibility this engine could be usable in Dragontail. It does have some synergy, but the point is, this is just a powerful engine that already exists, and basically any rogue strategy is using this deck to kind of prop themselves up. Many decks can use the powerful access that the Fiendsmith engine gives you, and in Dragontail, this is very important, because a lot of times what you can do is use the different fusion summons to get the monsters into the graveyard to proc some of the summons. Additionally, the actual monsters of the Fiendsmith archetype in the main deck don't mind being in the graveyard, so this is completely fine. Additionally, when we look at the extra deck, the benefit too is you can dedicate a good amount of space if you're trying to be more pure on Dragontail, so whatever your side engine is can take up a lot of space in the extra deck, and it's not that much of a problem. Obviously, Requiem, Desiree, Wave, High King Caesar, Necroquip, many of these cards that already exist for the different Fiendsmith combos are kind of important, and you would play them anyways, so there is some synergy. And also, getting locked into fusions isn't impossible with some effects. You can use some of your links first and then proceed to go into fusions later, and then proceed to go into stuff like Desiree and all these other cards, so you can set up a pretty interesting board. Obviously, set up a Caesar before you go into your Dragontail plays, but you start to get the point of it. This deck really works pretty well with it. Most importantly, we go over some of the criteria for it to get it out of the way. First thing is, there is no type synergy here. Light Fiends don't necessarily mesh with the spellcasters and the dragons, but it doesn't really matter because that's not really what you're playing the archetype for. Additionally, their playstyles do not clash. In terms of what would happen is, you don't really want to lock yourself into your fusions before you get into your actual Fiendsmith combos, and there is ways to enable your Fiendsmith combos with like Moon of the Closed Heaven, so this is not an abnormal strategy in this deck. You could just kind of pump it in and make it work. Additionally, the layers of interaction are important, having stuff like Caesar, Desiree available. Even having a Requiem setup with your fusions is pretty cool, and then you also have the Dragontail combo itself adding you lots of interesting traps, so you do have lots of interactions that way, so it just adds a little bit more to what's already there. And then finally, it's just a powerful engine. You can kind of win games or come back with just just drawing off one of the like Lacrima and going into a full combo or something like that. So it is pretty important that 2 monsters can go into that combo to get you back in the game if you have no choice. And additionally, this could change drastically, which is why this is here first. It's pretty obvious that Fiendsmith might get redressed hard on the ban list. I don't think they would be killed. I just think there'd probably be some immediate hits because we still don't have reprints Retract or Requiem. So there is a chance that Fiendsmith does dodge the ban list, but I didn't want to put it there in case they decide to hit it, even though they might reprint some of the cards. So let me just get that out of the way. Moving to the next engine, this is one that I have a lot of experience with from other strategies, but I did want to mention it here because it does have a lot of synergy with the actual Dragontail archetype, and the TCG we can play this because it's still at full power, that being Kashtira. So the Kashtira deck itself is very important for Dragontail because of its ability to either refill the hand for monsters in the case of Fenrir, but additionally having very high impact cards that don't actually take any space away from your extra deck. You don't actually have to play any rank 7s if you don't want to, or any Kashtira monsters related to the archetype in the extra deck if you choose not to. You can pretty much just run the main deck monsters as a part of your deck to give the deck a little bit more of a robust aggression with Fenrir, and then even some proactive responses with stuff like your Unicorn and your Birth. So it's pretty interesting that these 3 cards are pretty much what you'd want to run, because I do think that in the beautifulness or the most beautiful thing about the Kashtira engine in Dragontail is that you do dedicate main deck space, but because it's a very good actual like elements to it, it's not a problematic concept to do in the deck. So what I mean is adding 3 Fenrir, adding maybe 3 or 2 Unicorn or vice versa, and 1 Birth or 2 Births isn't actually an impossible strategy to put in Dragontail because they actually synergize very good. So I did want to mention that, being that Fenrir is extremely good for the deck, because what Fenrir really does is that it's a self-replacing body. So for a lot of fusion decks, their biggest weakness is that they don't replace a lot of their cards when they fusion summon. They have to have cards that trigger a lot in the grave to kind of get those resources back. What Fenrir does is it gives you an ability to kind of pop off a bit and get your plays going. So it's usually one of those benefits that Fenrir allows you to have a disruption, but also a card that gets you a net back. Because with Dragontail, one of their best advantages is their playstyle. They can pretty much play under Droll for a good amount as long as they open pretty well. So that one search for going for Fenrir, and if you get Drolled, isn't the worst actual dynamic. It is actually something that if you have the right setup, you can just play through that and just go, okay, Rahu, fusion, go for it, and now you have Fenrir set up, maybe Birth, or any other disruption, and then you have a replacement card if you just want to use the Kashtira monster as your monster from hand. So that's very important, and is one of the reasons why. Birth also gives the deck another dimension, because you're not really banishing cards otherwise outside the Kashtira monsters, and the Birth gives you a way to really hit your opponent's graveyard, so it does keep them on their toes and allows you some interesting dynamics going forward. But pretty much for this deck combination is that there is no type synergy again. I did want to cover it because that is one of the weaknesses of the deck, because the psychic monsters don't offer anything to the actual Dragontails outside of the self-replacement and power dynamic it gives. The playstyles do synergize pretty well because you can just do your combos before you normal summon any of your fusion monsters, or something interesting I think you can do is special summon, go for the effect of something like a Fenrir. If your opponent does not have any responses, you can chain Fimina to go for a fusion summon to kind of layer it if you're worried for some reason. That is something you can do because there's a quick effect, but the point is you're pretty much just aiming for this to be more of a dynamic where you're synergizing your levels of getting more resources back, but also keeping your opponent from really hitting your board too much without having to be punished by having their extra deck revealed, you ripping a card, and then Fenrir also banishing stuff face down. So that is very important. Additionally, the layers of interaction, as I just mentioned, are pretty solid here, because what Dragontail gets as a benefit is they get a lot of banishing effects, which they do not have access to naturally, and I think that's like the best part of this relationship between these two decks. It offers a lot of powerful synergy there and lots of interaction. Finally, the main reason why I covered it higher is that this could change drastically. Now, I don't think that Kashtira is a problematic deck per se, but I do think that if Konami's ban list is going to be more of a, I don't think it's a hard reset, but it could just be them like trying to change stuff in the format. There are these lingering decks and engines that could be hit that aren't necessarily the most toxic thing, but I could see Konami just hitting them for the sake of being like, let's just limit that so it forces people to play other stuff. This happened plenty of times. I think Fenrir is a pretty good example of something that could get hit just so they force people to play something else. Or even Unicorn being hit to 1 could be like, hey, we want to limit the power of Kashtira, let's put Unicorn to 1. You know, stuff like that could just happen as like a way of saying, we're changing the format, guys, trust us. And you know, it's not really big on the meta decks that are being constant problems, but hitting the rogue decks down so that they're forced to play other engines is something I could definitely see. Moving to our next deck, we have Shaddoll. Shaddoll is a deck that I think a lot of people probably thought of when Dragontail came out, because this is actually a pretty interesting deck that needs a lot of backup, usually from its supporting archetype, and I'm talking about specifically Shaddoll. The Dragontail archetype can support Shaddoll pretty well depending on how you want to build it, but I think its greatest advantage is that you can play a very minimalistic engine of the Shaddoll monsters. So what I mean by minimalistic is that you can run stuff like Hedgehog, you have Shaddoll Aerial, you have Shaddoll Schism, as usually some of the OCG lists I've seen, they're trying to pack in like very few cards. Now the main reason for these is that Hedgehog is obviously a spellcaster. It being a dark monster doesn't necessarily matter as much for Dragontail, but can help with other synergies. But the key thing is Shaddoll Hedgehog has a very good effect that if it's sent, you obviously can go ahead and add one of your other Shaddoll monsters. So this is kind of the key, I think, of this deck, is that Hedgehog just has a really good effect that can trigger when you get it sent to the graveyard, so through Fusion Summoning, or even if you want a Foolish Burial this isn't a horrible target to send. Aerial is here more so because I think the ability to banish cards is just really strong. So what this card is meant for is almost like a disruption. You just want to send this off so you can go ahead and banish your opponent's graveyard a bit. So it's pretty good at checking that. So it's like making sure you have a good target in the form of Aerial, and then surprise your opponent with some of your quick play fusion effects like Muller, for instance, and going ahead and Fusion Summoning, and then just really giving them a quick like hit your graveyard effect. So it does give a little bit of banishing, like in the like what I talked about with Kashtira, but I think this is better because you can search this and set this up. Additionally, Shaddoll Schism is here as a mandatory card because this kind of allows you to cheat a lot of your Shaddoll fusion monsters out. By cheat, I don't mean like actually like not summon them properly. This is more so that you can go ahead, fusion summon for your different fusion monsters and really put your opponent on a back burner when they're not expecting you to do it, or if you have it set already from searching it, they know that the window might be coming down, so it forces the gameplay to change a lot. So I think Schism's really good, and its Schism's second effect can be relevant because if you go into Shaddoll window and you're playing against a deck that has dark monsters, you can send that target to the grave because of the Schism second effect for attributes. So a lot of times it's pretty much just going to be window. There could be Construct if you want to play it, or any of the other Shaddoll fusions, because funny enough, Dragontail has a lot of different attributes in it. But the point is Schism puts in a lot of work. Finally, going off of the actual pieces here, type synergy is pretty good. I think that the minimalistic engine's smart. You can increase the amount of Shaddolls you want if you really do want that. Like if you want to draw from like Beast, or if you want Dragon to have that pop. There's a lot of interesting dynamics you can do with this deck, and it's pretty good. Additionally, the playstyles actually assist each other. So I think why this is one of the bigger things I wanted to mention is that one of the biggest weaknesses I think of Shaddoll is that it really needs a lot of engines to back it up when it plays something, because it has good strength, but it has a lot of problems in different areas where maybe it's too slow, or even if it establishes a board, it's not proactive enough to really keep your opponent off without window already being established. And I think one of the best things is that the Dragontail archetype fixes that issue by giving you a really robust combo to go with. You have traps already set to kind of disrupt your opponent. Your Dragontail monsters have disruptive abilities, so you're in a really good position. And then if you back that up with a window, back that up with Construct, back it up with Shekanaga, something like that, you actually put up a lot of problems for your opponent, and it kind of facilitates both of them being very strong. Additionally, you have these layers of interaction that are very powerful. I think having a floodgate in window is already really, it's toxic, but hey, it's Yu-Gi-Oh! This is kind of how this works. Additionally, it's the ability of having a very small engine, but it's very powerful. So like with Shaddoll, this is one of the reasons modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is, depending on how you feel, it's like a really bad or really good, because you do need to make engines very compact to be useful, and I think this is one of them that is very good because it just does a lot for the fusion archetype, but also the synergy is there to allow you to gain access to other fusion monsters to replace themselves, but additionally allows you to also pump out some very powerful fusion monsters in the form of the Shaddoll monsters. And then finally, I don't really see any changes here. I put this here because the only real thing I could see is like window being banned randomly, but otherwise I don't really see it happening, so do keep in mind that's just the only thing I could see. But going into another one, this is a deck that I think is a bit more fun in terms of the actual application, but someone could definitely pilot this well and take down some pretty good tournaments, this being the Magistus version of the actual Dragontail deck. Now this is a version that we've only really seen in the OCG, and I'll get into the reason why later, but the point of this is that the Magistus cards actually synergize extremely well for being spellcasters, but even more importantly than that, they give the deck some pretty interesting fusion monsters to go with, especially being Crowley the Gifted Magistus out of the last Battles of Legends set. The reason this card is so good is because it is treated as Alstar the Invoker when it's used for a fusion summon. So what this means is that in many cases you have access to the invoked fusion monsters pretty much much Mechaba, but the point is, because this is also treated as Alistair, you have access to all of the different attributes in the Dragon Tail archetype, so you could run actually all of them if you want to. You could go for Raijin, you could go for something like Purgatrio, you can go for even something like Kaliga if you really want to, because there are darks, but the point is you have access to the full range of them, Mechaba being probably the most important one because it is a negate, but the point is you have access to that there. And then for the actual Magistus fusion monsters, the brand new Verithin Ragna, which is the fusion monster out of Battles of Legend. This one actually is a negate. Now it does take either a Magistus monster plus a fusion Synchro Xyz or Link monster, so you do have to use probably one of your spare fusions, but the point is Verithin Ragna is a actual negate, so there is some instances where I could see this being useful as like a way to just either stop a Nibiru if you're going over 5 summons, or even something where you could just stick this on the board to try to negate like hand traps or your opponent's field. So there is a lot of actual power behind this deck already, because there's this fusion monsters you just kind of pack into your deck. But breaking it down, there's a few reasons about this strategy that are good. First is just the type synergy. I think spellcasters already being a main focus is good. Additionally, the playstyles are very complementary, as Magistus really just wants to pile into its different mechanics, whether it's Fusion, Synchro, Link, or Xyz. But for it being a fusion-based strategy, using the fusion-based part of the archetype, I think it's absolutely paramount that you have an archetype that can not just give you a lot of powerful synergy, but also it has to work together really well. And this is kind of where the Dragon Tails help out, because one of the benefits is that ability to go into the invoked fusion monsters. I cannot stress how powerful that is, because it will catch people off guard. Additionally, the layers of interaction are massively increased here, because one of the things that you now know from watching the Dragon Tail part of the video and the archetype is that it has no negates, no hard negates, except for Muller, and Muller is just one card. So adding a fusion monster that can be a negate in 2 ways, whether it's Verithin Ragna or even Mechaba, is extremely powerful. Obviously, the more possibilities are added here, because I think the deck is a little restricted depending on the engine, and this one just gives you a lot of other options you can tag together with the archetype, and it is absolutely very strong together. But I do think there will be no change on this, and I'll get into the reason why, as I think I would have had this higher up, but this archetype is missing a card, as Spoon, the Seal of Magistus, which I believe is a VGEM promo in the OCG, was not imported in the last Battles of Legends set. I double checked to make sure, because like I never saw this in people's binders, but this card is absolutely mandatory for this version of the deck, because this is your way to search for your Magistus monsters. But additionally, it has a good battle phase effect, but it also is a light monster to put in the grave, just so you have the ability to already have Mechaba set up. So until this card comes out, I think this version of the deck is a lot weaker than it should be, but it's not bad. And now we're going to cover one that I think everybody expects, and is one that I have higher up for experimentation, but I don't know how it'll do in reality, that being the branded version of Dragon Tail. Now this version will be a pretty, I think, a bit more stronger here in the TCG than the OCG. This is mostly because a lot of the very powerful cards in the branded archetype, although having branded fusion at 1, all of the other branded cards for the most part are available at higher copies. We have stuff like 3 Saronir. I'm pretty sure Saronir is at 1 in the OCG with all the other actual Bestials. I could be wrong, but like a lot of the OCG cards have different hits for the branded archetype. And I think because we have a little bit different ways of viewing it here, the actual branded archetype's a lot stronger. It still sees him play in rogue situations, and it actually does hit tournaments pretty well thanks to the idol lock. But I think this is where I talk about the fact that this is just a really good strategy. It has good synergy. Spellcasters are already in it because of all the different Ecclesia variants. Additionally, the playstyles are very complementary, because Branded Fusion is just one heck of a card to drop on your opponent. You don't necessarily care if you're playing Dragon Tail and that you go ahead and lock into fusions already, because it's just very powerful. Additionally, the layers of interaction are added because you can still have like Mirror Jade. You can have access to different fusions. You can set up Branded Chimera if you really want to, which kind of does synergize with Altharion in a way. And additionally, the possibilities go up a lot. You could also idol lock your opponent if you really want to. The engine's very strong, so I don't think that needs to be talked about, and I doubt any changes will take place. So unfortunately, I don't think you'll get Branded Fusion to more than 1, but it is important. Now we'll cover some of the archetypes that I think are good, but they don't really have the ability to fully synergize with it, but are good for experimentation, and or engines that are very good, but it is up to you to decide if you want to try it. Starting off first is Tier. So Tearlament does kind of work with Dragon Tail to an extent. Now this is more so because not that the Tearlaments actually synergize with the Dragon Tail's fusions, it is that the fusion monsters you make with the Tearlaments can be subsidized with King of the Swamp being used in the deck, allowing you to search for polymerization, and vice versa. If you go ahead and mill some of your tier monsters, you can go into stuff like Rule Kalos, like your Mud Dragon of the Swamp. You have different targets you can make to just add layers to your board, so this is an option. However, I do not know effectively how good Dragon Tails are with milling, because I do think they kind of work together, but not fully where I want them to be. But that's kind of where I have tier. It's definitely something you could look into and try it out if you're going to play King of the Swamp in your deck, which most people might at the start, but they might choose to not do it. Additionally, we have the Sinful Spoils engine here. So this is more so because you want good engines to kind of synergize in this deck, but also get you bodies. This is important because Diabell Star, both in Vengeance and Black Witch, actually do really well in the deck, in my opinion. First, Wanted, getting you either access to Diabell Star in the form of Vengeance, or Diabell Star the Black Witch, allowing you to summon itself and get more cards back, is going to be really good, because I do think once we get the Dark Magician support for the actual Dark Magician deck, Dragon Tail versions of Dark Magician will appear, and I think this is going to be an important engine for that. But more importantly than that, Vengeance works really well because you do have spells and traps in the archetype, and you go ahead and banish them a lot to get out these really powerful monsters from your deck, and they don't mind being in the graveyard for the most part. So if you go ahead and decide to go ahead and just fusion summon off the Diabell Star to the grave, you can use Wanted to either grab it back, or use Wanted to grab Vengeance, and Vengeance can summon itself from the grave. So there's a lot of synergy here, but I do think it does leave you up to thinking if you want to run this or not, because it's not the most high ceiling engine, but it does offer a little bit more direction if you want to. Going into the next one, I have Primite. So Primite, Dragon Tail does exist in the OCG, and it is actually a very good version. I think the main thing I wanted to talk about with this is that ultimately, if you really want to play this, you can totally go for it. It plays pretty much linearly with the Dragon Tail combos, and you just add the Primite cards into the deck to allow you access to it. You can decide what you want your actual normal monster to be, whether you want Dark Magician, Red Eyes Black Dragon, anything along those lines that kind of synergize. So you want like a dragon or a spellcaster, but the sky is the limit, and you get to decide here. This engine is just very strong, so I don't really think it needed too much explanation, as I do think the synergy here is good, but you just basically do one then the other, so there wasn't really much for me to discuss here, because pretty much every Primite deck functions along these lines. Going into, finally, K9, as this is an archetype that will be emerging out of the set as well. I put it down here because there's a lot of decks that will obviously probably tech the K9 engine in, and you can totally tech this into the Dragon Tail archetype, because Izuna gets you to Lupus, and getting Ripper established during your opponent's turn is pretty strong, but also Izuna is a good target to either keep in your hand to use as a hand trap effectively, but additionally you can fusion summon off the Izuna if you really feel like it, because you can just use that effect to get it out into the grave. So there is a lot of interesting dynamics here, and is a reason why K9 sees so much play, but it also is why you can run it in Dragon Tail, because this is pretty self-explanatory. The OCG has done this, and I think TCG players might do it as well. Finally, we'll talk about the best part of Dragon Tail so I can close off the video, and that's actually the fact that a lot of people misunderstand that Dragon Tail being so strong is because of their fusion abilities. So the main thing is that the fusion monsters require any card in hand, or monster in hand, sorry. So any monster in hand as a fusion material can literally be any of your hand traps. You have a good amount of them here for the format that you might want to tech in, and this is extremely powerful because your opponents may be caught off guard by that, because if you effectively don't brick, you can basically go ahead and just sack off any additional hand trap that you do not want as a fusion material for your monster. But additionally, because of the strength of it, you can run stuff like the Charmies. You could run all three if you really wanted to, but you do not have to. But these cards cannot be understated how powerful they are, and you can use them as fusion material, so they are never bricks. You just need to make sure you have access to your Dragon Tail cards. But the final part I want to talk about is the fact that stuff like Altherion can get you the monsters back from your grave. This could be any of your Floodgate monsters that you happen to go ahead and fusion summon off and just retrieve them. Stuff like Jinzo, Chaos Hunter, Spell Canceller, these are just cards that you can kind of think about as ways to get back from your hand thanks to Altherion, and is actually one of the most broken parts of the deck, as any of the cards I just mentioned can be added back to your hand when you fusion summon for Altherion in exchange for cards in your hand. So effectively, if you're in a long drawn out game and you go for Altherion, you can pitch two cards that you think are duds in your mind as for its fusion summon to add back very powerful hand traps or disruptive monsters that you plan on summoning to your opponent's field. But guys, that's all I've got for you today. I'm going to close out the video here, as this has been a pretty large engine access focusing on just some of the decks. There's a lot more too that you could play with the Dragon Tail deck coming out, but I do think this is the best thing to look at when it comes to the splashability of this archetype, because there's just so much you could do with it, and also so many other decks that might be able to be played with it. So if I missed something, let me know down below in the comments. But additionally, if there are some decks that you want to try out, let me know what they are down below so I can understand what people are thinking and cooking up for the upcoming format in Justice Hunters. But guys, this is what I've got for you. I'm going to be getting out of here so I can cook more stuff for you guys and get to it, as this has been Brad from the Ed Army signing off, and for all of you out there, to sign on.